Hi, Jeff Spira here again, and today I want to talk to you about flotation. There seems to be a lot of questions about flotation and a lot of misinformation about it. The most common question people ask me is, how do I meet the flotation requirements? And, I usually respond with, what requirements are you talking about? And those that are in the know come out and say, well, Code of Federal Regulations, Title 33, Sections 1.83-101 to 1.83-335, those regulations. And I usually reply with, well, you realize this is for boat manufacturers who intend to sell their boats, not for home builders of boats, right? And most of the answer is, no, I didn't know that. So there really are no hard requirements for a person building a boat in their backyard or building it to my plans or whatever. So that does not constitute you being a boat manufacturer. It just means that you're a home builder. Now the Coast Guard has a document, and it's numbered COMDTPUB P 16761.3B. That's the one I have. It's available free on my insider section. You can download it. It's called Safety Standards for Backyard Boat Builders. And it kind of explains what the requirements are for manufacturers to the average, say, home builder, but it's not a hard requirement for a home builder building boats. It's a guideline for boating safety. So they recommend that you follow their guidelines. That's it. Now some manufacturers use that document to explain to their the people that work there and that sort of thing, what the hard requirements are, but it's not but they aren't the hard requirements. So the hard requirements are difficult to understand. It's written in lawyerese and engineeringese. So you got to have an understanding of both of those fields of study, let's put it that way, to be able to understand the hard standards. So, but this backyard safety publication that the Coast Guard supplies or has is pretty technical. I mean, it kind of requires at least an understanding of math and physics and things like that your average person may or may not understand. Now, I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I get it. I mean, I can read it and understand it, but it's not exactly easy for your average person who has not studied these topics to follow how it goes. So I'm going to describe how to apply these to my boats, and particularly the flotation part of the requirements in there, and how that would apply to my designs. Now, I don't know how it would apply to someone else's, to Glenelg's or some other designer. I have no idea how those would apply to their designs, because I haven't analyzed those designs and haven't looked into them and studied them to the level that I have my own, obviously. So if you want information about what kind of flotation and how to deal with other people's designs, you're going to have to ask those designers, or analyze it yourself based on the necessities, or hire somebody to analyze it and determine what you need for their boats. So anyway, let's talk about flotation. Let's talk first about buoyancy. People say that flotation increases buoyancy. It doesn't. It actually decreases it, because the devices or the things that you use for flotation weigh something, so they reduce the buoyancy of what you're trying to float. So people think that the boats float higher in the water when they install foam into them. No, they don't, because foam weighs something. It weighs more than the air that the foam is in. So it actually floats lower than an unfoamed boat, for instance. But let's look at my hulls. My hulls are built as of fiberglass and epoxy on the outside over a wood framing and plywood skins. So my hulls are buoyant. They'll float. You could saw them into pieces and throw them in the water, and they would float. They would not sink. So they're unlike an aluminum or a fiberglass boat or something like that. You don't have to worry about the hull floating. It will. It doesn't matter whether it's full of water or got no water in it or whatever. It'll absolutely float. So there's really no flotation requirements for my hulls. What you don't have flotation, what you don't have flotation for, or buoyancy of, is a gear that you add to the boat. So if you got a giant motor hanging on the back, that motor is going to sink. Your anchor and chain up in the bow, they're designed to sink and go to the bottom. So your batteries that you add to the boat are full of lead, typically, unless you got some of the new ultra lightweight lithium batteries. Anyway, so they need flotation as well. What about you? I mean, you need to float, right? Well, you're 70% water, so you're about neutral buoyancy. You don't necessarily float or you don't necessarily sink. Depends on your body style and type. People that tend to have high fat levels in their body tend to float, and people with more muscle mass and low body fat tend to sink. So that's that it means you're about neutral buoyancy. So your body's 70% water, so it should be. I mean, 70% of it has got zero buoyancy, and zero requires nothing. So the way you would achieve buoyancy in a boat, though, is using a PFD, a personal flotation device. That's what it's there for. It's a device that keeps you from sinking to the bottom or getting dragged down by the coins in your pocket or whatever, sinking down and going underwater. So you keep the top half of your body floating pretty well. So it keeps you upright, keeps your head from going down, even if you're unconscious. The right kind of flotation, and so it prevents you from drowning by sinking. So that's the whole thing. But there's other things in a boat, like what about the fuel? Well, gasoline or diesel weighs something like 6 pounds per gallon, and water is about 8.5 pounds a gallon. So gasoline or diesel will float. The gas tanks they're in are usually sealed. I mean, there's no way something can come in the top of them, so that they've got air in them. So that's additional flotation, and the tank is usually made of something like, say, polyester or polyethylene, which is a plastic, and typically that plastic is lighter than water. It has a specific gravity less than 1, so it will float as well. Even if you cut it up in pieces or filled a tank with water, it would still float because it's lighter than water. So you don't need any flotation for the fuel you carry. Now, if you have a steel tank, you might want to consider it. But aluminum is just not heavy enough to have it make up for the lightness of the fuel and the airspace within them. So you don't have to worry too much about aluminum tanks or plastic tanks or however that works. So really the only thing you need to account for in your boat is the motor, the anchor, and the battery. So the anchor and chain of the battery. So, you know, smaller things like electronics or porta potty or things like that are really not. They're neutralish buoyancy. You know, a radio, you know, a VHF radio or something like that. You throw it if you throw it in the ocean, it'll float. It might drift down. It might be a little bit more than neutral buoyancy, but not much, and it traps water and traps air inside of it in the plastic case and that sort of thing. So it's pretty light. Cooler, you know, it will float most if you throw it in the water, even if it's full of, you know, beer and other things. You know, it's going to float. So your fishing tackle's the same way. I mean, they'll sink, but not very much. So it's pretty much all the stuff you have on the boat, the various, you know, camping gear and whatever else you bring along has pretty much zero buoyancy. So you can disregard those in terms of flotation. So fish as well, you know, you kill a fish and throw it in the water, it floats to the top. So, you know, there's really not much you put on a boat that's not zero buoyant, you know, zero flotation required, let's put it that way, other than the motor and the anchor chain and the anchor and its chain and the lead acid batteries if you use those. So okay, so if you put a 300-pound motor on your boat, like a 90 horse or something, you'll need a flotation of at least 300 pounds. So it doesn't sink when the boat's filled with water. So how much does your motor weigh? I mean, a 90 horse weighs 300 pounds or something like that. A 115, I think, weighs 400 or something like that. I don't know, 350, 400, I don't know what. But the four-stroke motors weigh more than the two-strokes. If you've got some of the older two-strokes, are very, very light. So, you know, something like the old 7.5 horse two-strokes, you know, you could pick them up with one finger. They were 30 or 40 pounds or 30 pounds, something like that. So now, but foam that you want to add to your boat to make up for this added equipment that you have can give you about 60 pounds of flotation from a cubic foot of foam. So foam usually weighs less than a pound or two per cubic foot. And fresh water weighs 62.4 pounds per cubic foot, and seawater weighs 64 pounds a cubic foot. So the right number to pick is like 60 pounds per cubic foot of foam that would, you know, counteract that whatever gear you have. So let's say you have a 300-pound motor, which would be a, you know, 65 or 75 horse motor, something like that. You'd need 300 pounds divided by 60 pounds per cubic foot. So you'd need 5 cubic feet. So if you had a block of foam that was 12 inches thick, 18 inches long, 1.5 feet long, and 2 feet tall, let's say, you would that would equal 3.5 cubic feet. So if you have 2 of them, let's say, that would be 7 cubic feet. So it would support 420 pounds. 7 times 6 is 420. Anyway, well, that's enough for that motor and a pair of batteries, for instance, with these, you know. So, and that'll usually fit under your aft seat if you have that. Maybe it seats 4 feet wide and, you know, 18 inches over the, or 12 inches over the deck and, you know, 18 inches wide, so something like that. And that would fit those 2 blocks of foam under there. So you could also put them in on either side of the motor, one on each side. Particularly if you have a splash well, there's going to be a compartment on either side, and a chunk of foam will fit right in there. So, And then you could put a half a cubic foot block, which is enough to keep 30 pounds afloat up in the bow under the deck, which is, that's pretty small, 12 by 12 by 6 inches. That's not a very big block of foam under the forward deck, and that'll take care of your 30-pound anchor and chain. So there you go. You're covered then for a moderately powered, mid-size home-built boat like I supply the plans for. So what's the flotation for? Well, it's really to keep the boat afloat if it's full of water. Okay. So you got to ask yourself, how does water get into the boat? A lot of people say, well, I need higher sides because, there's waves out there and they come over the side. Statically stable boats, which are wider, flat bottom, or shallow V boats. It's really rare to have a wave come over the side. The boat lifts as the wave comes towards them and raises that side of the boat, when the boat stopped, and so the wave doesn't come over the side of the boat. It just doesn't happen. A lot of people claim they need high sides because there's waves out there. Oh no, that won't happen. Now, deep V or round bottom boats, they're statically unstable, so they won't rise nearly as fast. So yeah, if you get some really choppy, rough water, it can come over the sides. If you're stopped or going slow, remember that they tend to tip more when you're static. As you move side to side, or the dog runs back and forth, or something like that, than statically stable boats, which are flat bottom boats. So how about splashing over the bow? Well, when you're going fast, right? It just comes over the bow and splats you in the face, and that doesn't happen very much either. The bows tend to be buoyant. Again, my slower boats have pointier bows, so they pierce the waves. They tend to, and my faster boats like Pacific Power Dories and stuff have blunt bows, so they have a lot of lift in the bow, and then the underside is lifted up, so that you would rise, the bow would rise before water would splash up over the bow. So, even my drop front Garvey dories, people ask me, how do you keep that thing from sealing? I mean, doesn't the water just come right through the crack and fill up the boat with water? No, it doesn't work that way. That doesn't happen that way. Water comes in two ways. The first way, and the most common way to put water in your boat, is rain. Okay. If your boat's not appropriately covered when it's out of the water, rain will get in there and fill the boat with water. So, and the second way is through some sort of accident. It doesn't seep through the cracks, unless it's an old Carvel plank boat with cracked ribs and a poorly adjusted through hull fitting for the inboard, motor shaft going through. You damage the boat by running over an obstruction, or you could run over a rock or something like that and poke a hole in the bottom. That's how water gets in. So if you're up in the Pacific Northwest, you see a lot of these deadhead logs that they float vertically because the roots get saturated with water and they stand up, and then the waves bounce them up and down. So they'll, this big log or tree, really a tree, will come flying out of the water vertically, and then it'll disappear back down there. And if it happens to come in underneath you, you're in a world of hurt. So anyway, so now if a boat is raining hard on it, then you'll get water in it. So so if you have a self-bailing deck, which keeps the water from going into the bilges, and it allows the water to drain out through scuppers. or you have a good bilge pump that keeps up with it. That's all you really need. And when you take the boat out of the water, you open the drain plugs and store the boat bow high so that any water that was trapped in the bilges can drain out and dry out. So, I kind of prefer the drain plugs that have their own. You can't take them out. There's a catch in them so that they prevent you from losing them. So you when you just pop them open and pull them as far out as they go, when you take it out of the water and there's a good chance that if you're pulling them out through the way most people launch their boats through a launch ramp, the boat's going to be nose high when you take it out anyway. So as soon as it comes out of the water, if you pop the hatches, any water that's in there will drain out. And if you store them in your, under a roof at home, you're not going to add more water to it. So, as I mentioned, self-bailing decks. Now, what a self-bailing deck is just a deck that's sealed, and some water will get through around the edges and stuff like that. So it naturally will. But in general, then you have usually two scuppers in the aft section of the boat, one on each side, and they go to a check valve scupper in the transom. So this allows, now my self-bailing decks tend to be quite low because I'm very conscious of keeping boats to have a lowest center of gravity as possible. It's just the way I design them, and I think that's the safest way to have a boat is with a lower center of gravity. But so if you have a self-sealing scupper, when you're stopped, the scuppers seal, so any water splashing against this transom or whatever will close that check valve, and it won't come into the boat. So, but when you're planing, when you're up on a plane, the bow of the boat is fairly high, and the transom is fully out of the water. The water pulls away from the transom even if it's below the water line. So the scupper is out of the water, and any water in the boat will rush back to the aft section, whatever wall you have in there, and if that's where your scupper opening is, then it runs into the scupper and then out the transom, and all the water gets taken out of the boat. So that's the method that I suggest that people put on my boats that have built-in self-sealing, or I should say that have built-in self-bailing decks. So, which is most of my V-bottom boats are built that way or designed that way, put it that way. Now, a lot of my flat-bottom boats don't have a self-sealing deck. Some of the bigger ones I've had people put self-sealing decks on, like the 24-foot Key Largo, for instance, which is a flat-bottom boat, and I've had people use them for, offshore fishing. There's a group or a couple of guys in Mauritius that fish tuna with them. So they're out, a week at a time or something like that, and they built a little bit higher deck on them and put in scuppers so that they would, water that came in as rain or whatever would flush off the decks and out through holes in the transom. So. Now, probably half the people that look at my boats, particularly flat bottom boats, they see that there's that gap between the bottom and the deck, where the frame sits vertically and the deck sits on top and the bottom sits below. So they think, well, that will just fill that space up, and we'll just spray foam in there and fill it all up. and put a sealed deck on it. It's typically a bad idea. You can't keep that area dry. It will get wet. It will. There's no way to keep the water out of it. So it's like sealing a wet sponge in there, and your boat will rot. That's even if you use treated lumber, it'll just rot a little bit slower than if you don't use treated lumber. Well, you might think, well, I'll just seal the wood with epoxy before I put that foam in there. It doesn't work. The wood will get wet. You'll seal the water in there. It will have no way to dry out, and the boat will rot. So you're better off using untreated lumber, making sure it stays dry, making sure the boat gets drained and dried out between uses. And then it'll last forever. You don't have to worry about it. So maintenance is the key to that. So you can't seal the water out. You have to drain it out. So your flotation really needs to drain. So you could take and cut up blocks of foam that fit in there, but not tightly, that fit in there loosely, so that water can drain out of those areas, through the limber holes and out of the bilges, if you wish. That would work. You could also use smaller pieces of foam, like cut up pool noodles is popular, to put down there, or even sealed empty water bottles, or even, I've heard people talk about using ping pong balls. That makes sense to me too. And then you would have the water would be able to drain around the flotation. So any water that gets collected in there, even if it's just a little bit, a few splashes or whatever, so it'll prevent you from rotting the wood that's there. So, but if you do that, if you decide to do that, put a bunch of foam in the bottom of the boat, how are you going to get it close to the motor, for instance, which is where you need it? It needs to be aft. It can't be in the middle of the boat, because then the motor will sink and the boat will just sink vertically. I've seen a boat sink that way in the Pacific Ocean. There was a 20-foot fiberglass boat, and the boat. They had issues and all that, and we had some bad weather. We were trying to tow it, and it was all kinds of stuff, and it finally went down. But the first thing it did is it turned vertical. So the flotation was keeping it up for a while, but the motor was sinking it, and then eventually the boat sank completely. So it just disappeared from sight. So. But if you have foam underneath the deck throughout the boat, it's not going to be in the location where the motor is, so it's not going to do you much good there anyway. So 2 blocks of foam, one on either side of the motor, is a lot more effective than the entirety of the bottom of the boat foamed in. It just will work much better. So. Every boat I've spent a lot of time at sea at had no foam, had no flotation. It was all done with air trapped in the bilges, and self-sealing decks. So even commercial boats certified for taking passengers don't have flotation. They have bulkheads so that they if water gets in one area, it can't get it in the other. So the water doesn't occupy enough space. The air keeps it out of different areas. This has been a requirement on boats and ships since the Titanic sank. That was 108 years ago or something like that. 109 years ago, something. So that's how boats, or really flotation, works. Is it's not a bunch of foam or that gets sealed in the decks. It's keeping the decks, the spaces below deck, filled with air instead of filled with water. And so if it does get damaged through poking a hole in the boat, for an accident, or running over up on a rock or something like that, then you need to keep it located in a smaller area. So anyway, so that's the story of flotation. I hope this made sense to you and is going to help you stay safe out there. Be sure to share, like, subscribe, and comment below. It's the best way to help this channel out and keep the good stuff coming on a regular basis. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.